Welcome back, Chess.com members. This is FM Mike Klein, and I'm excited to bring to you part 2 of the high-level entertainment series on Underpromotions. In part 1, we looked at a couple basic examples and also some more complicated ones. In some of those examples, you had to promote to rook, some to bishop, and some to knight. This game I'm about to show you right now has a little bit of a unique twist to it, which I'll reveal at the end. This is Zhirikov-Koblenz from the 1950s, and white's got a whole stash of pawns in exchange for black's knight. So white begins this game by playing king to d5. Of course, the knight has to run away. The knight chose f3, and the only way for white to save his pawn is to advance it. Black is definitely going for a draw at this point, so black decided to try to get rid of as many white pawns as possible, which is the correct strategy when you're trying to draw. So black traded pawns. Now the big question is, how do we stop this pawn? Well, the pawn is only 2 squares from promotion, and if we draw a square of the pawn, you guys can see the black king cannot get inside the square. So it's all up to the knight, and Koblenz here thought he had a way to stop the pawn. He started with the idea knight h4. Of course, the pawn has to advance to g7, and it looks impossible for the knight to stop this pawn. But here was his idea. He played knight to f5, and if the pawn travels to the square g8, and promotes to queen, as one would expect. Then we have the fork knight to e7. Black collects the newly promoted queen, and that should be a pretty easy draw. So, what did white do? Well, he promoted to knight, of course. Still, not that easy of a win. We have a knight and 2 pawns against the knight, but importantly, the knight stopped black's knight from making a fork. That's one of the reasons you sometimes have to underpromote. The knight's got that unique power that straight line pieces like queens, bishops, and rooks don't have. Okay, we're still a long way to victory, and I'm not going to analyze every single one of white's next moves. Suffice to say, white methodically gets his king and 2 pawns up the chessboard. He's taking his time here. There's no rush. He doesn't want to advance his pawns until he's sure that they're safe. He remaneuvers his knight, and finally, when the time is right, starts advancing the pawns. Okay, black is just basically trying to blockade these pawns and not let them advance any further. These moves are not really worthy of our study today. This is mostly just white slowly progressing his pawns up the chessboard. But I need to show you one last thing that happens later in the game. Okay, in this position, it looks like white has been successful in getting his pawn to c8. But wait a minute. If he promotes to a queen, we have that nasty knight fork again. Knight to d6. So what does white do? That's right, he promotes to a second knight. Some of us go our entire careers without making an underpromotion. White has made 2 underpromotions in the space of the last 15 moves. Unbelievable. I can't say that I've ever seen this before in a chess game. 2 underpromotions, both to knights in the exact same game. White also finishes off very cleanly, because after black's king moves, look at this nice finish. King to b6. And here black resigned. White has allowed one of his knights to get captured, but if it does, of course, the pawn gets to the other side. And if black continues playing, let's say by moving his knight or something, it doesn't really matter where the knight moves, white will advance with check. And if the king goes to a8, we'll actually get to mate with 2 knights. That'd be a pretty nice way to finish. And if he takes our knight, well, I'm sad to report, white actually would have to make a regular promotion to a queen and win in a little bit more pedantic way. Let's take a look at another example. Our next example involves 2 famous grandmasters. White is the late Grandmaster Kolmov, who actually has a plus score against many world champions. And black is Grandmaster Jan Elvest of Estonia, who represents America. In this game, black has more pawns, and all white can do, it seems like, is keep his rook on h1 to prevent the pawn from advancing. But Kolmov tries this interesting idea by playing rook to a1, with the idea of trying to come up to a8, check the king, promote with check, and even win the game. He also sets a cunning trap. If black plays h1 and promotes to queen, that seems to stop the threat, right? The queen guards the square a8. But wait a minute. Kolmov would actually play rook to a8 anyway. The king better not move. White will promote with check, and white might even win the game because he has the initiative. So black would have to capture the rook, and after doing so, it's an immediate stalemate on the board. Okay, well, what other choices do we have? promoting to knight clearly doesn't do anything about rook to a8. Promoting to rook doesn't do anything about rook to a8. Now white's going to win this game. So the only winning move that I know of is to play pawn to h1, promotion to bishop. The bishop does the necessary task of guarding a8 without the unnecessary task of capturing on a8 and guarding too many of white's squares. Now rook to a8 is very simply met by bishop takes, and if there is no stalemate, black clearly wins. We won't go over the rest of the game because after the pawn promotes to bishop, black has a decisive material advantage, and sure enough, black went on to win in only a couple more moves. Now we look at an example with a lot more pieces on the chessboard. White's got this passed pawn on the c-file, and as we say, passed pawns must be pushed, so white starts out with pawn to c6. Okay, black's in a lot of trouble here because his passed pawn is being blockaded. White eventually is going to find a way to get his pawn further down the board, so black starts to resort to stalemate traps. Maybe black saw those videos by Kirwa on high-level entertainment stalemate traps. Black begins with rook to d8. And if we take the rook, well, it's immediate stalemate because we pinned black's bishop, black's king can't move, and every one of black's 6 pawns is unable to move. So white does a funny thing here. He just ignores the rook and plays pawn to c7 anyway, intentionally leaving black with a rook on the board. If black takes the rook, now we can promote to a queen, and black's rook simply has too many moves here for a stalemate to be possible. Black might try the resource rook to d8, but you know, if white didn't fall into a stalemate the first time, he's probably not going to fall into it the second time. Simply queen to e6, avoiding queen takes rook, would lead to an eventual win. We're threatening mate on g8, we're threatening mate on f6, and white is eventually going to win. So in this position, instead of playing rook takes rook, black decided to slide his rook over to c8, hoping for one last trap. Rook to d8 was played, black took the rook, and now we have a very close facsimile of a previous position. If we take this rook and promote to a queen, it's stalemate. Promote to rook, it's also stalemate. Now the only thing I don't like about this puzzle is we could actually promote to a knight or a bishop, but as we said previously, if you can promote to a bishop, you've got to. It's so much more rare than promoting to a knight. Plus, by promoting to bishop, we're threatening an immediate checkmate on f6. So I think promoting to bishop is actually a faster way to win. Bishop f6 is going to lead to mate. Black's only move to try to stop this would play bishop to f7. He's hoping for one last stalemate trap. And now, if you play bishop f6 check first, you'll be in the clear. When the king moves over, you could just trade bishops, and this is a winning position for white. White's going to maneuver his bishop back to guard the e-pawn promotion, and after a series of moves, I'm not exactly sure how it'll work out, but you'll work your king around, and now you've got your bishop stopping the pawn. Play a little waiting move here, and your king eventually fights its way into the position. King moves, we have as many waiting moves as we want, and if the king travels this way, we could probably come up the board the other way. If he travels this way, we'll come eat the queenside pawns instead, and white would win. Our next example is not from a real game, but the study is so perfect that we have to show it. This is a study done by Karl Jaenisch from 1850, and I'd like to say that I found a lot of my positions and studies today from Tim Krabbe's excellent Chess Curiosities webpage. If you love the kind of material we're going through today, I encourage you to Google Chess Curiosities, and you'll be able to find his great website with all kinds of trivia and factoids about chess. This position is white to move and win, and you can see the white king starts out in such a bad spot that he's in danger of getting checkmated right away, rook to c1. There's not a whole lot white can do about it, so the only starting move for white is to offer his extra queen and play queen takes g5. Of course, black has to capture. White captures back, and now we have a series of relatively forced moves. The black king is not going to be able to catch this pawn, nor can black's h-pawns ever get past the white king. So black's only defense is stalemate. This is actually similar to one of the stalemate ideas that Keaton Kirwa showed in his previous video. So black's best chance is to advance his pawn, h2. He's going to try to bury his king. After h2, we play g6. Black plays h4. We play g7. Black plays king h3. He has successfully buried his king. Now, I'm sure our viewers can see at this point, if we play pawn to g8 and we promote to rook or queen, it'll be immediate stalemate. So I'll let you guys ponder, what is the correct under promotion to make in this position? There's only one way to win. You actually have to promote to a bishop. It's the only winning move. A knight does not work out, as I will show you in just a minute. A bishop is actually a relatively simple win. The bishop guards our only pawn forever. Remember, it's a rook pawn, so take a quick peek at the pawn's promotion square. The pawn's promotion square is a light square. Importantly, our bishop is on a light square. And the way for white to win this would just be to wait for the king to move. Probably a move like bishop to e6 is the most accurate. The pawn eventually has to advance. You just keep toggling your bishop. And you can see here, the black king has to move away from his h2 pawn. So we grab that first pawn. And when the king moves, let's give a quick check. We grab the second pawn. And this is an easy win for white. He's going to walk over, he's going to win the a pawn, and the bishop, as we said, is the correct color of the pawn's promotion square. Let's go back and take a look at why promoting to knight would actually not be good enough. So in this position, if you promote to knight, then the king will chase after the a pawn. Obviously, white's king is stuck, so only the knight can help out. Let's give the knight some sort of random move, and the king keeps running. If you take the pawn, the king keeps on running. Now you can get your knight in the game, but the king keeps on running. If you get your knight closer, the knight simply can't protect a rook pawn very well because he only has one side of the pawn to protect from. Now the knight could run away, but he'll run after your pawn. You better go back and guard it. You might even lose if you don't guard your a pawn, and the king will go back to c3, and this position is actually a draw. Now I'd like to go back to the starting position, but this time I'm going to add a couple of pawns to the chessboard. You can see I've added a white pawn on b3 and a black pawn on b4. Now how could those two insignificant pawns on the other side of the chessboard possibly affect the solution? Let's take a look. White still needs to begin with the move queen takes g5, just like before. Captures, captures. Black goes for the stalemate defense. We advance. Black tries to bury his king. We advance. Black buries his king. Now let's see if we can figure out what the correct way for white to win is. Promoting to rook and queen both lead to stalemate. Previously, promoting to bishop was the way to win. But amazingly, this actually loses for white. Unbelievable. The bishop cannot guard the a2 pawn anymore. And now the win for black is simple. Even a kid would find it. King to g3. White's king can't move. He just has to make some random bishop move. And here comes the king. And you're not going to be able to stop the king from catching the a pawn. This is actually, as I said, a win for black. Let's go back to the position we promoted to a bishop. Interestingly, promoting to a knight actually does win this position. I'm going to let you guys work out the analysis for yourself. What I find amazing, though, is that adding those two b pawns makes the bishop not the correct answer, but the knight is the correct answer. Our final example is a famous and dramatic usage of under promotion. This just occurred at the previous Olympiad in 2012 in Istanbul, and it was the final game to finish in the USA-Russia match, which was played near the end of the tournament and would do a lot to decide the eventual winner. In this position, on the top board, Hikaru Nakamura has had an extra piece for a while, but Vladimir Kramnik has done a good job of getting rid of most of the pawns of the chessboard. In this position, Kramnik played the move rook to e7, which is actually a blunder, although his position was probably lost anyway. It allows white to finish in amazing style. After rook to e7, let's see if we can figure out a forced line of play that Hikaru Nakamura found to win the match for himself and for the USA team. He began with the move rook takes e7, not a move he was able to play when the black rook was on f8, because when the king takes, Nakamura needs the king to be on e7 to make his combination work. He played c7, and there was kind of a funny backstory to what was going on. I was present during the game. When he played c7, I didn't understand what was going on. I looked over in the stands, and one of his teammates, Varuzhin Akobian, also didn't understand what was going on. We both thought that black was going to be able to collect this c7 pawn. Black played the move e2, and in this position, if white promotes to a queen, black will take the knight, black will promote to a queen with check, and black may even win the game because he's got this pawn on d2. So the line that both Varuzhin and I analyzed was king takes, pawn to f3, discovering an attack on the c7 pawn, and when the king takes one of black's pawns, black will take, and this is a theoretical draw. White will collect the d pawn, but white's extra knight is not going to matter, especially with bishops of opposite color. So we're both a little bit puzzled here, and in this position, instead of playing pawn to c8, promotion to queen, Nakamura played pawn to c8, promotion to knight, which is in fact the only way to win this game. By promoting to knight, he gives a necessary check. Black had to move his king. Then white collects this pawn, and he's gotten his pawn on c7 out of harm's way. If black's pawn comes to f3 now, white can simply take that pawn on f3, and nothing has been put in danger on the dark squares. This is now a winning position, even though white does not have any pawns remaining on the chessboard. I'll show you the conclusion. King to e5, and white eventually collects this pawn on d2. This is actually not too hard to win, but I'd like to show the nice finish here by Nakamura. He keeps the black king stuck on the side of the chessboard, and he's able to win this game without ever collecting the f-pawn at all. He's closing in the box, and in this position, Vladimir Kramnik finally resigned. Black is unable to avoid a checkmate, because if black just makes some sort of move, the knight will take the pawn check, the king will have to go to the corner, and we're going to mate with two knights again. Probably not the way he wanted to finish out the game. So USA won the match, and the novelty of Underpromotion was not lost on Nakamura. He finished the game and had a big smile on his face. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our two-part series on Underpromotions. If you've ever underpromoted in a real game, feel free to share that game in the comments below. We'd love to see how it actually worked out for your games. This has been FM Mike Klein for Chess.com.